हजारों के साथ नियमितता से घटने वाली घटनाएं हैं और ये
The convener of the Northeast Cell, Shri Sunil Devdar-ji, my colleague in the Rajya Sabha and our party spokesperson, Shri Prakash Javadekar-ji, the president of the Delhi BJP, Shri Vijendra Gupta, Shri Mahendra Pandey and friends. For some reason, Sunilji has asked me that some of you, for reasons of convenience of language, may prefer that I speak in English. Is that so, or I can speak in Hindi? English, all right. But about a year ago, we organized the Northeast Cell for the purposes of contact of those friends from Northeast who live in various parts of India. And I had the fortune of joining the inauguration of that cell at the Constitution Club at a function which was inaugurated by our party president. Northeast is an area which, for more than one reason, is an area of concern for us. And when I say this, I have two reasons for this extra concern and affection that we need to bring into our thought process with regard to the Northeast. The BJP, as all of you know, in terms of our ideological position, we are normally considered staunchly a very nationalistic party. And therefore our attachment for everything which is Indian, every inch of Indian territory, we feel very strongly as far as these issues are concerned. The second reason is, and I think when some people have a grievance, it's not entirely without reason. Northeast was one of the two regions of India which got worstly affected because of the partition of India in 1947. Punjab got very badly affected. Punjab was divided into two, and Bengal was divided into two. The circumstances before and after that were very tragic. India saw the largest migration of human population ever in global history. And when population of this kind migrates and refugees come, there are serious problems which arise. Rehabilitation has to take place. Massacres took place on both sides of the border. It was accompanied by some kind of a feeling of frenzy even in Bengal. The circumstances were of this kind. But then there is one great strength that the Indian society has, which is a sense of resilience. And slowly but surely we got out of it. But the changed map of India affected Northeast the most. Punjab got divided, so Punjab stopped with the boundaries of India. Bengal got divided, so it stopped with the new boundaries of India. But the long-term impact on Northeast, and that impact continues till today, is that if you see the entire map and conceptualize the entire map, and all of you feel it much more in actual practice than any one of us does, the physical distance between Northeast and the rest of India increased. The creation of East Pakistan later became Bangladesh. The impact of that was that anyone wanting to now travel to Northeast now has to go through the little portion of Chicken Snake, and most people travel by the rail or the road route. There are very few fortunate people who can travel by air. And the impact of this was that Northeast moved, because of the partition of India, almost 1200 kilometers more from the rest of the country. Now the impact of this 1200 kilometers is not merely on the human mind, it is on actual day-to-day life of a citizen. And some of us living in the rest of the country cannot even conceptualize as to how much of a difference it makes. So every product that you buy in Northeast, which is not produced in Northeast and has to go from other parts of the country, has to take that extra distance. So if it has to take the extra distance, distance involves addition to the cost. So whatever you get there is costlier than what people in rest of the country get. The next big impact is India as a nation missed the first industrial revolution. But over the last 30, 40 years, we started building our own industries, first in the public sector, now in the private sector. And therefore, when the industrialization of India is taking place and a larger industrialization will take place, raw materials have to be carried from their source of availability to where the industrial plants are. And therefore, nearness to the port. So you must have a port in close proximity from where raw material from outside the country can come. And if finished products are to go outside the country, there must be a port. So in that sense, Northeast becomes landlocked. The raw material which comes, therefore, is bound to be costlier. And when a businessman feels that setting up an industry there is far more costly than rest of the country, then it disincentivizes his desire to set it up there. Therefore, there is involved, because of this distance, and the distance got increased essentially because of the new geography which was created. I remember when we were in government and the government from Bangladesh used to discuss with us various issues. One of the principal issues of concern that we had was an issue of physical access. Access is access from the port. Access means access from physically rest of the country. So from pipelines to power lines to a railway to a roadway. Access through Bangladesh is capable of cutting down this great distance which the partition of India and the changed geography had created. Of course, since 1971, the domestic politics of Bangladesh being what it was, we had ups and downs in various negotiations. I recollect at one stage there was a proposal that should Northeast not have access to a port. And at that stage, the government of India was even contemplating talking to the government in Myanmar if a road could be built and an access could be created to one of the ports which could be specially designated where Northeastern industry trade could also use it, the governments could use it. This time I was reasonably hopeful because after a long time in history we have a government in Bangladesh which has the best of relationship with India. And therefore, when the Prime Minister went, I always had a silent hope that in this visit, the issue of access could be clinched. Unfortunately, that did not happen. And one of the reasons why it did not happen clearly appears to be the internal dynamics of the government. Because at the last minute, the West Bengal Chief Minister decided not to travel. And she had certain reservations about the final draft agreement, which it involved giving too much excess water of Teesta. And therefore, the response on the access was not very encouraging. But I have not the least doubt in my mind that this is not an issue which is a partisan issue between the NDA or the UPA. It helps Bangladesh also, because the access is never free access. It's a service they provide. And because it's a service that they provide, it's a service that will help to boost their own economy. For every man who travels, for every car or bus who travels, every train passenger who travels, you get paid for it. Therefore, from pipelines to power lines, and if this distance can be cut down by 700-800 kilometers, and that's the potential that this has, I think it is capable of giving us a great impetus and boost as far as development of northeastern India is concerned. And therefore, my own view is the government of India, whichever party is in power, we must continue to pursue this. And this is one area which is capable of bringing a lot of relief as far as the Northeast is concerned. Once this were to happen, I think there is a second issue also. And I remember sharing it with a number of friends who work in the Northeast, who live in the Northeast, some of my own friends. And this has been a personal introspection for at least me. From the very beginning, as a part of our party's ideological position, because of the entire issues and disputes which Pakistan used to raise in relation to Kashmir, Kashmir became an integral part of our ideology. And therefore, we always had a very strong position as far as Kashmir is concerned. I believe, and I've been discussing with a number of friends, and that's why we are slowly taking these initiatives. The same mind space that we have because of our emotional attachment on the issue of Kashmir, the same mind space, if not more, has to exist in relation to the Northeast. All these issues that you raise, since I have a different physical personality, I am mistaken. We are capable of resolving these issues. But I think the mindset in relation to Northeast has to be, just as Kashmir has been on the top of our ideological and political agendas, the issues relating to Northeast also have to acquire the same mind space, if not more. Now, what happens if they acquire the mind space? I consciously began with this issue of distance, because this issue of distance then goes to the core of various problems. From travel to cost of living to our ability to industrialize Northeast, each one of these areas, then we are capable of resolving within the precincts of Northeast. I think there are some areas of Northeast which have a huge, huge potential. The people in Northeast have shown to be extremely extrovertish, going to different parts of the country. And over the last few years, I think this trend has increased. I think it's a very welcome trend. When I was a student, I'm talking of the early 70s, and I used to be an activist in the ABVP, we used to have a program we used to run called the Student Experience in Interstate Living. So every year we used to ask some students of Northeast to come to Delhi, stay with the families and then go back. And this was our own little small humble way of promoting national integration. At that time not so many people used to come, very few used to come. But today that aggressive desire has hugely increased. And you can see that. Even in states which are troubled by insurgency, I can see, you referred to the sports persons. I am seeing across the country the hospitality industry, whether it is hotels or it's airlines. I am seeing the nursing industry, the paramedicos. There are some states of Northeast, Manipur in particular, where I see a very large number of people now taking an initiative into these professions. I do feel that we need some areas of core competence in terms of generation of economy in the Northeast. And these are all unexploited areas. You have to overcome this problem of closer access. Then you have to improve the communications within the Northeast. You referred to the National Highway Program. Now, I believe National Highway Program is one of the most successful programs in India. I am not willing to say that it's the most successful program in Northeast. So the East-West Highway, which had to cut across from Bengal and then go up to Silchar, I think we call it the Mahasadak. That's the name they call it. Is that stretch of the highway which is still not complete. So you had in 2002 the National Highway 2001 being perceived. It's complete, the Golden Quadrangular and the north, south, east, west, and now within the states you have various kinds of highways being created, because these are not bounties which the state is giving to the people. This is now a right. So for every liter of petrol or diesel that you buy, you pay a cess. And therefore when you pay a cess, that cess is intended to be for your own use. So unless you are able to create within Northeast the same kind of quality of highways. I remember in 2003 I was in charge of the elections in Madhya Pradesh. When I used to go there, the roads were a nightmare. Now when I go there, the strength of the stress and the highways is both state and central, that you find major cities and areas connected with each other, and these are highways very well comparable with the best in the world. So why, unless you are able to have that kind of connectivity in terms of the highways, unless you are able to create that connectivity in terms of the railways, why should people in the Northeast still be either have no access to railways, and very large areas have no access to railways? Now we can pierce through the Himalayas and get into the Kashmir Valley. I don't know whether if you people have seen the best railway anywhere in the world. If you go through these countries and the Alps mountains, Switzerland and Austria and these countries, they are all mountainous countries. The most beautiful railways are there. People travel from, not through highways, they also travel through the trains, some of the most beautiful ones. Now the modern technology permits it. And our economy is growing in size. And therefore, unless we are, and there are areas which don't have it in Northeast, there are areas which are still fighting in terms of, please make meter gauge into broad gauge. Now I remember we used to hear these demands in the 60s and the 70s. These issues don't exist in many other parts of the country, but still when you go to areas of Northeast where there is an access to the railways, this issue is heard. So you can't perceive in terms of an ideal development unless the access with the rest of the country is quickened, unless you have, when you speak of infrastructure, what is infrastructure? Infrastructure is communications. Communication is roads. Communications is rails. Communication can be through inland water transport. Northeast has that facility of inland water transport because you have lovely rivers. Communications can be telecommunications. It is communications for information. So these are all areas, once you develop this, then you have to incentivize and people come and invest on their own and economic activity will start. It's a resource-rich area. And in a resource-rich area, you have oil, you have gas, and you have water. No country or no state anywhere in the world produces everything. So if you gain core competence in a few areas, you have forest, you have a capacity for tourism. Are we aware of the strength of tourism? 12% of world's population, not India, world's population, directly or indirectly gets employment through tourism. You go to small states and you will find millions of tourists coming. Along with Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Northeast is one of the most beautiful areas for any tourist activity. You have a variety of cultures available, you have religious tourism, you have forests, you have lovely mountainous sites. And every tourism is an industry where the rich man pays and the average man gets a job. Now from tourism, with water available, power, and hydel power is one of the cheapest modes of power. So Northeast is capable of producing that power. Now these are all areas where we have an ability. And then I think there is a potential. And that potential is Northeast has a potential to also be an educational hub. 2 days ago, I was in a small town in North Karnataka. That town is an educational hub. There's one society which runs 212 educational institutions there. Now that kind of a situation in Northeast can't come soon. Therefore, the primary responsibility of the state to convert Northeast and have not only educational institutions, but to have quality educational institutions. And I think these are all important areas. Some parts of Northeast have a different problem. Our borders with our neighbors have to be settled. Arunachal particularly has this issue in relation to China. Some states have a common border with Bangladesh. And directly relatable to the settlement of the border in Bangladesh is that the illegal migration must come to an end. Illegal migration has several impacts. It's an economic burden. It impacts on the demography of the region. It impacts on the culture of the regions, because when demographies change, the characters change. It can also have a lot of security implications, particularly if the migration comes from countries of persons who are not particularly friendly with you. And therefore, the settlement of the border, and just as we have been able to create a fencing in large parts of the Pakistan border, I think this is an area we have to seriously look at. And while negotiating this, the sentiment of the people, and this is not only sentiment of the people of Northeast, the land of Assam is not a land belongs to Assam, it belongs to India. So it's not only because I'm Assamese and some of my land in Karimnagar or somewhere is going that I must be concerned. Every man in India has to be concerned with this area. And therefore the government negotiators have to be particularly conscious of India's territorial sovereignty. With China, the problem is a little different. China has settled its boundaries with several neighbors. It's not settling with some neighbors. It has a huge water boundary dispute with Vietnam. So when Atalji went to China in 2003, I had gone with him, and these separate working groups were set up. And one of the working groups' objective was to resolve the boundary issue with China. And that group has met on several occasions. But for some reasons, they have not been very forthcoming in settling the boundary dispute. So every time the Prime Minister or the Army Chief or the Defence Minister visits Arunachal or Tawang in Arunachal in particular, they raise a dispute. So one can assess what their intentions really are. But the more we settle these boundaries, we ensure that there is peace and amity which emerges in those areas. I think the fact that a large number of students from Northeast, first for studying, then for working, are coming to other parts of the country. And it is quite obvious that where there is a greater prospect of economic activity, people will get attracted to those areas. And therefore, we are speaking in Delhi. Delhi fortunately has a very liberal culture in this. People from every state have migrated to Delhi, and Delhi has some of the best inter-community relationship and a relationship with visitors who come there. So we have from states like UP, Rajasthan, the original migrants came from Haryana and UP. The trading communities migrated. Then from Punjab, after partition, the Punjabi refugees migrated. Then from Bihar, UP, from South India, a very large number of people. Then from Northeast. And fortunately, it's such a lovely city that you have everybody being welcomed with open arms. And this is a city which has an ability to attract these people. And it's natural because the maximum amount of governmental resources go into these big metros. And therefore, economic activity is generated in the metro or around the metro. And therefore, any person with some element of initiative who is in search of that economic activity will be attracted to those areas. And I think this helps in more than one reason. It helps because it increases the cosmopolitan character of India. I have now for the last few years stopped practicing law, but when I was practicing, the kind of youngsters as apprentices and trainees and young lawyers who used to work with me, they came from different parts of the country. Some of them came from Northeast also. I got to understand a lot about these areas through my interactions with them. And therefore, this kind of an interaction promotes national unity, it promotes a sense of better understanding. And I think not only in terms of education, and some of you must be studying in Delhi University or Jawaharlal Nehru University or Jamia or any private institutions here, will all realize that these are all institutions which have acquired a multilingual, multi-state, multi-religious character. And therefore, we are able to grow up understanding and knowing each other much better. Finally, I am told that a large number of you who have come here, that's what Sunil tells me, are law students. I think the character of law education in India is now changing. There was a time, particularly when I studied, that those who did not get admission anywhere else used to go and do law. And law was a very difficult exam to fail in. So even if you did very badly, you would still pass a law exam. Over the last few years, particularly last 10 to 15 years, the character has changed. Law has become a course of preference. So law is no longer a last resort. People out of preference are joining law. as the economy is growing, the whole potential of law education is changing. The national law schools set up all over the country have actually raised the bar in the quality of law education. And I can tell you some of our national law schools are as good as the best in the world. So if a student from Bangalore or any of the national law schools came and worked for us as an apprentice, I would find him as good as the one who'd done his masters in any of the best foreign universities, if not better. Delhi fortunately also has a national law school now. And it's in its first three years, I think it's done exceedingly well. I happen to be associated with it, and I think it also has the potential of being one of the best legal institutions in the city. Then you have, of course, law in the Delhi University and other universities, also private educational institutions which have law. The potential has grown hugely. The quality of teaching has increased. There is one problem. The best in law don't want to become teachers. So the quality of law teachers has to improve. The earning scales of lawyers has increased so much that if you are exceptionally bright, you'd rather look for a lucrative opportunity there rather than go in for law teaching. The second area is that pursuant to legal education, the quality has changed, the medium has changed. This whole concept of internships helps you in very great practical wisdom, and I would suggest to all of you that forget your compulsory internships. More than that, if you even round the year get opportunity to work with law firms or lawyers, in the evening, even if you go for 2 hours or 3 hours to their offices and try and learn while you are studying law, it's a much greater help to you. In fact, as a part of your Northeast Sampark cell, if people want to train, you must allow this facility, coordinate with Adhivakta Parishad, allow this facility so that people can learn. The real place where you learn is in the courts and the lawyers' offices, not in classrooms. And the whole potential thereafter is gone. People want to avoid litigation. Therefore, instead of hiring lawyers, they want to have an inbuilt legal system within their own corporation and their businesses. So while you are doing business, people must advise you the right thing so that you don't fall on the wrong side of law, and therefore you never have to see the courts or the lawyers. Therefore, the potential for jobs for lawyers or legally trained personnel, even outside the courtroom, and these are becoming very high quality jobs. In fact, in the national law schools, a very large percentage of people now get picked up by private companies and multinationals even from the campuses, because that's where the potential is. Then, of course, when you come and practice law, you have to test your aptitude. Are you cut out for litigation? Are you cut out for non-litigation? There's a big scope in non-litigation. Some of the biggest law firms today are the ones not going into litigation because with business and character of business having changed, the advisory work, the joint ventures, the investments being planned, these are all areas which law firms are now taking care of, and therefore people train, and there are lawyers who've never seen the face of court, and they are some of the most successful lawyers. And these are law firms. You'll find very large, big law firms who are working in those areas. And then, of course, some people who can talk well, who can communicate, who want to go to courts and want to become litigation experts. They also have a variety of opportunities. Everybody wants to go to the Supreme Court first, but then that should come after a little bit of training. People are going in for trial criminal law because the age, we are passing through an age where good trial criminal lawyers is a fading breed in India. And therefore, unless some very talented people get into that flow in those areas, they will not find the talent in those areas growing. And therefore, I think always going back home and practicing is a very good option. Training for some time, working for some time in a big area like Delhi, and then keeping your options open as to whether you can find a great career for yourself in this very fast, cruel world here, or go to a more peaceful area after training and start working in the Northeast. These are all options which are available to a person. But I think since some of you are here, I don't think it's the right word. It's not, the word is not a guest. Just as Northeast belongs to me, I said my mind space about Northeast has to increase. I have as much a right to this city as you have, and therefore you must make the best of this experience. It's a vast world here. You are here at a stage where your personalities are evolving and developing at this age. And for any lawyer, he needs a huge development of his personality. That's more important than the number of marks he gets in a law exam. And I'm sure this will be a great experience. I'm extremely grateful to all of you for being here and to Sunil and his team for having organized this interaction. I'm sure, as I said, we have a lot to learn from you and you have a lot to hear from us. Particularly when I said we have a lot to learn from you, is that the Indian political establishment needs to enlarge its mind space on issues of Northeast. It's only then that we'll be able to resolve a large number of these issues. Thank you very much and very kind of you.
I'm Jack Long. I'm doing my PhD in Jawaharlal Nehru University. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, even in post-dinner speak in one of the hostels in JNU. I always like that. So my question would be in regards to counterterrorism. So that's what I'm doing my research on. So I would like to ask you, like,
दो तीन चार प्रश्न हैं जो अलग अलग तरीके से पूछे गए हैं और एक प्रश्न जो सबसे प्रमुख है वो फॉरेनर्स को लेके है और दूसरा ये है कि उसी का अंक है कि जो फॉरेनर्स ऑलरेडी वहां पर आ गए इलीगल माइग्रेंट्स के रूप में, उनके साथ क्या किया जाना चाहिए। फिर उसी से एक बात उभरती है कि सीमा खुली है, उससे जो सुरक्षा पर, स्मगलिंग पर असर पड़ता है, हम लोग क्या करें। मैं इसका एक इतिहास आपको बतलाना चाहूंगा। देयर इज अ हिस्ट्री टू दिस and that history is not necessarily a very pleasant history. Some political groups probably felt that with the original population in some of these states, you can't politically succeed. And therefore, there was a conscious effort to alter the demography of these regions. Some parts of Assam, Tripura, these are areas which got adversely affected by it. अगर आप 1960s, early 70s में जो कांग्रेस की लीडरशिप का स्लोगन होता था, if you go through that entire history, you will probably be able to realize why this happened. Now there have been two rounds. The law which was created, the IMDT, one of the efforts itself was to create a situation by which detection and deportation of foreigners becomes almost impossible. So when the IMDT was struck down by the Supreme Court, in the second round, the rules and the procedure was so badly created that it's almost an onus on the state to prove that somebody is a foreigner. If somebody is there, he has to show that how long he has been here. My own view is that the present government, both in Assam and also in Delhi, has no political will to seriously detect and deport foreigners. As a result, the whole process has come to an end. I think you need, we have been amongst the national parties most vocal. There are some state parties also which have been speaking on this issue. I think what is extremely important is to put an end to this porous border. And therefore, resolving all the boundary issues and putting an end to that porous border checks further infiltration. You need a legal mechanism. You need several tribunals. And our party's stand is very clear: detection and deportation is necessary. You can't allow the demographic and the cultural character of some of these states to be completely altered. Now, fortunately, you have now a government with which we have a reasonable relationship in Bangladesh. And even at the cost of a lot of international criticism, successive governments in India have kept a working relationship with the military regime in Myanmar. If you see, when the European heads of state, particularly when the British Prime Minister came, they are extremely upset why India deals with them. I was recently in United States, and every decision maker in the US will say, why do you deal with Myanmar? And our answer was very clear, that we have the concern of Northeast in mind. Some of the insurgent groups get refuge there. And therefore, we need a situation where we have a working relationship with them. And therefore, we need to strengthen our diplomatic initiative in making sure that these kind of illegal trades coming from some of those areas are brought to an end, because not only they disturb the economy, they also disturb the very peaceful life of the region. Counter-terrorism, our friend who's doing a research in the JNU asked us. Well, I think the foreigners issue and the terrorism issue have one fact in common. If you want to resolve these issues, one fundamental decision you have to take is to de-link it from the vote bank politics. If I treat illegal migrants as voters, and I think they are adding to my kitty, then people will develop a vested interest in keeping them. That's what's happened. Similarly, on the issue of terrorism, you need a strong political will to crush terrorism wherever it comes from. Now, as a part of counter-terrorism, you need several strategies. Your entire mode of collecting intelligence and information has to alter. Unless you have advanced information of what's happening, you are never able to scuttle those attacks. Now, what has unfortunately happened is, even if you see jihadi terrorism, which the Indian Mujahideen has been recently in its regrouped form started, last so many cases Delhi has had 4, other parts of the country has had. There is never an advance information of what's happening. So our intelligence system is being bypassed by them. We are not being able to infiltrate into them. And secondly, our quick response is inadequate, and our investigation is not able to crack them. Now, after 26/11, the government has announced that National Center for Counter-Terrorism would be set up. We are now almost 3 years since then. Virtually the first step has not started. They have now said the intelligence grid would be set up, and some of these agencies would be put under the National Counter-Terrorism Center. But these are all in their infancy stages. We were told that the NIA would be created and it will do wonders. But post NIA, most of the cases are still unresolved. Mr. Chidambaram got very angry when I mentioned about 2 weeks ago, in the course of a public disclosure, that post NIA, your Varanasi, your that Shitla Ghat, your Chinnaswamy Stadium, your Mumbai, Mehroli, Jama Masjid, 2 in Delhi High Court, these are all unresolved cases. And therefore, we need an effective. Why is it that after 9/11, major incidents in US have not taken place? You mentioned Israel yourself. And therefore, unless we can alert ourselves to these issues, I don't think we'll be able to fight them adequately. Now, 2-3 friends have asked very pertinent questions about the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. I think let's not go by the nomenclature of the Act. One should go by what is the issue involved. You will always find security. It's not only in Northeast, it's even applicable in Jammu and Kashmir. We need to run our states with normal laws. But do abnormal situations prevent them? And therefore, the presence of any form of army or paramilitary forces is not a voluntary choice of the government. It's only when you have insurgency, you have violence, these have only to come in to protect the citizen. The problem arises, and this is one of the hidden costs of insurgency, and all of you are intelligent, you must understand this, that when security forces arrive, in order to curb terror, even the life of a private citizen who's a peace-loving citizen gets disturbed. We don't like being frisked. I went to Kashmir last year as a part of a parliamentary delegation, and some of the students who met us, we were actually very touched by what they told us. When I wake up in the morning, I don't want to see a policeman outside my door. When I go to my college, I don't want to be checked 5 times on the way. I don't want to come back home and see my parents worried whether I'll come back safe or not. Well, these are questions which are put. These are relevant questions. Now, a lot of you who are studying in Delhi have a much more peaceful life because you don't find these kind of problems in a relatively peaceful area. There are times when you have security forces, there are complaints. At times these complaints are genuine also. That when you go and take action, you may take action against 10 people and you will suddenly find in 2 or 3 of those cases, they've also committed excesses. And excesses have an impact that they alienate the people more. Therefore, these are costs of insurgency, these are costs of terrorism. These are the hidden costs which a society has to pay. The apparent cost is violence, loss of life, loss of property, loss of normalcy. But people don't invest money in terrorist areas or insurgency areas. So there's no jobs, there are no businesses, there are no commercial activities, these are hidden costs. Harassment of people is a hidden cost. And even excesses being created in the course of this action is an important hidden cost. Now you are faced with a Hobson's choice. You completely withdraw the security forces and you'll find anarchy. You keep them there, you'll find some of these problems arising. So you require a twin mechanism. You'll require, in order to eliminate terror, you'll need your security there. But you need a safeguard to ensure that there is no abuse or misuse of that security that takes place. And therefore, an act like this there are some concerns which people are expressing, particularly with regard, it's an old act, some of the language which is used in the act. These are all areas which can be looked into. But one area, and I confronted this, let's ignore Manipur or Northeast for the moment in the context of Kashmir. There are a very large number of applications made for prosecution of army officers. Now the government of India is confronted with this choice. It's not an issue we have to decide, it's the government of India, and they've been discussing this. If you allow these prosecutions to go on, then what is the impact? The other counter argument is, but where there is a genuine excess committed, somebody commits a rape, somebody commits a murder, which has nothing to do with security, which is an excess, you have to permit it. So I think a more balanced, you are dealing with your own people and you are dealing with it in order to save them from insurgency. So the position is very clear You need the security mechanism, but you need adequate safeguards to make sure it is not misused. And if somebody misuses it, then the state must have bold shoulders to say adequate action must be taken. Now, how you frame it, the name of the act and its provision, it becomes a slogan. So I am not going into those specifications. But this is where the position as it stands. As far as Manipur is concerned, it's a very, very serious problem. We are conscious of it. Last time when the blockade took place, we had met the highest in the government, we had sent teams there. But today you need a situation where the central government, the state government virtually can't disappear, which is happening there. And therefore the governments must assert both the authority of the state, but do it in a compassionate manner where you continue a process of engagement. And today itself we've discussed with some friends in our party, we also intend to take it up in a serious way with the government of India. If the parliament was in session, we would have raised it there. That's the forum where we could had an opportunity. But here we will certainly be taking it up with the government of India so that adequate intervention takes place and some solution to this blockade in Manipur, which is continuing on the highways, is found. Thank you.